Retired Justice Wally Oppal, former Attorney General of British Columbia, he continues to be the go-to expert on any subject involving the law. One thing for sure about Wally, he never hesitates to speak his mind. Respected for his leadership of the Missing Women's Inquiry and his numerous reports on policing in BC, Wally Oppal was awarded the Order of BC in 2017 in recognition of his outstanding service to our province. Wally, all of your careers have kind of circled around the field of law. How did you get into law school in the first place? What drove you?
Well, I grew up in a small town in Vancouver Island. My parents were immigrants from India. My father died when I was 10 years old, so my mother raised the two of us. But she's a housekeeper, and so she was obsessed with us doing something. She wanted us to go to university. And so I went to UBC, and I knew that as an Indo-Canadian, I wasn't going to be the president of Macmillan Odell.
You felt that there were, because of visible minority, you wouldn't have a chance.
Yeah, and this is the days before visible minorities were in, where they had to bring in visible minorities. So I thought I should be either a doctor or a lawyer.
And so you decided to become a prosecutor. Why?
Well, I went to do a law firm that did a lot of special prosecutions. And so the first year I was there, the Attorney General sent me this letter appointing me to conduct a special prosecution in one of the real gangland killings. And I was only junior counsel on it, and I was 28 years old, and I was clearly in over my head, but senior counsel got sick. So I carried on with the case, and it attracted a lot of media attention. And so that's how I got involved in special prosecutions. And after that, you know what happens in life? People actually think you know more than you really know. So anyway, they kept assigning me these sort of large cases, and I did probably 50 to 60 homicide cases, special prosecutions. And
when you talk about being a prosecutor, you've often said you really loved it. What did you love about it?
Well, I not only prosecuted, but I also defended cases, and I loved being in a courtroom. It was my calling, I thought. I enjoyed appearing before juries, and so it was something that I very much liked, and people thought that I did a pretty good job at it, so that's what I did.
You mentioned one of your first cases was a gangland shooting.
Yeah, yes.
You saw a lot of the bad part of society during your time as a lawyer. Did it ever get you down?
No, none of it really did. From time to time it did. The thing that really got me down was later on, and that was doing the Picton inquiry into missing and murdered women. When the government appointed me to do that, Robert William Picton, who was the largest mass murderer in Canadian history, had his way with killing poor, vulnerable women from the downtown east side. And he had gotten away with it for many years. And so there was a call for finding out what happened. Why did this semi-literate pig farmer outsmart the police in taking these women out to his farm? So when the province appointed me, I thought, well, I'm suited for this because I'd done a lot of homicide cases and I'd done a number of inquiries, particularly when I was in government and even before that. I didn't realize how gut-wrenching it all was. These women who came before me, many poor women, vulnerable women, Indigenous women, whose daughters were killed by Picton. And the anger that was palpable in the room was really difficult. And there was there was that, and just listening to women coming before me and testifying how their daughters had gone missing, and their invariable response was when they went to the police, "Ma'am, we don't have time to look for hookers," or "Your daughter was a drug addict. What do you expect us to do?" They were throwaways. And so it was a huge eye-opener for me to see how poorly the Indigenous communities have been treated over centuries in Canada. So,
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, so yeah, that was difficult work. We made a lot of recommendations, 65 of them, and I'm encouraged by the fact that many of them were adhered to, and for instance, they redefined what a missing person was. The police response usually was, "Well, there's no law against going missing, you know, and why are you coming to us to talk about your daughter who's gone missing? She's 21. The fact is now the law has changed because of our recommendations.
And so when you were pressed into being a judge, I'm curious to know why you accepted and what you thought you could accomplish there that you couldn't accomplish as a lawyer.
Well, I was a trial lawyer, and I eventually wanted to be a judge, but when I first went into the system, I thought, there's no way somebody with my background was going to be a judge. I just didn't think that was possible. And so I don't have any misgivings that I did it. It was rewarding. You could right things that were wrong. You could deal with people who were really wronged by the system, and you were in a position to do something and give them justice, quote unquote. I tell this story. I was going through a Safeway in Tawasin about 9 or 10 years ago. I get to the checkout counter, and the person there is a young man, probably 27 years old, and he welled up. And he stood up and he said, "You're Wally Oppal." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You saved my life." I said, "How did I do that?" He said, "Every time you're on the news, my mother says, that's the person who saved your life because you gave custody of me to my mom and not to my dad when you were a judge." So it gets stopped like that, and it's emotional, but it's good.
Rewarding.
Yeah. So it was good, and but I always wanted to do something else, and then the second part of going into government is something that I never ever thought I would ever do. The Premier called me, Gordon Campbell, and I didn't know what he wanted. He said, "Jeff Plant's not going to run anymore. You're the ideal Attorney General." And that's something that piqued my interest, and because there were lots of things I wanted to do. As a judge, you're very limited because you're dealing with one case at a time. But in public life, you get involved in policy, and you can do a lot more. And so that's how I succumbed to that. So, yeah.
You succumbed to being named the star candidate.
I remember the first cabinet meeting I went into. The Premier says, "Do you notice anything different?" I said, "Yeah, nobody stands up and bows when I go into a room anymore." It was, and by the way, when I got out of a caucus meeting or a cabinet meeting, there were 7 people out there asking me to justify myself. It never happened when I was a judge. I didn't have to answer questions. I didn't have to give a satisfactory account of myself.
I think most people would say that the press has been glowing throughout your many careers, but that first day, what kind of questions did they ask you? Like, who are you and what are you doing in politics?
Yeah, I was asked that, and I remember getting a letter from the former Chief Justice Alan McEachran, and he said, "I admire you for the courage in what you're doing, leaving the comfort of the Court of Appeal to go into public life." I sent back an email or a letter, and I said, "Well, there's a very thin line between courage and an insanity, and I don't know what side of that line I'm on in making this move." But at the end of 4 years, I really had no regrets for what I did. We did a lot of things that I wanted to do, violence against women, just dealing with vulnerable people. And so I got involved in the prosecutions, much to the chagrin of the bureaucrats. And I interfered in all kinds of places that maybe I shouldn't have interfered with. The Bountiful issue was a perfect example. Shortly after I got appointed as Attorney General, I got a call from a reporter in Toronto and said, is there any truth to the rumor that British Columbia is going to bring in Sharia law? And I said, it won't happen while I'm the Attorney General. And I went into a litany of reasons how unfair it was to women. And so the reporter said, if you're that concerned about women, what are you doing about Bountiful? I had a smattering of knowledge what was going on. So I went to the RCMP and said, what's going on up there? And they said, we can't get witnesses. The people in my own ministry said, don't go there because it's freedom of religion. That's our religion. I said, it can't be their religion for 60-year-old men to be entering into marriages with 16-year-old women. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. And so against all advice, I said we were going to prosecute. And so I got huge accolades from so many women's groups, and I got flowers sent to me for what I was doing. But at the same time, there were editorials. I remember one in the Montreal Gazette, and it said, what right does Wally Oppal have to determine whether or not people want to have multiple relationships? Prosecutors always think they're independent. And I was a head prosecutor, but there's an unwritten rule that you don't interfere with prosecutions. But I did.
Do you remember that many lawyers felt that this was just impossible that you would have anything to say on these matters and would write articles and editorials and make comments, and you stood up to all of that?
Carol, I knew that I wasn't going to be a career person. I thought I was going to be there 4 years and I was going to be gone. And so that's why I did these things. And I wasn't going to be there long because of the life and the way, the way you had no remedy, you had no independence. As you know, some 25-year-old person runs to you and says, hey, here's an airline ticket, you have to be in Ottawa on Thursday. You don't say, well, it's not convenient to my schedule. You go. And so at the end of the day, and I'm sure you felt that we could do some good things, but you can't stay there forever. And so that's what I decided to do. I made a mistake in acceding to the Premier's request to run one more election. And that didn't end well. So.
Well, let's tell that story, because I could never believe that you decided to leave your riding, which was very secure, and run in Delta South.
You gave me the best advice, and you said, are you effing crazy? Are you going to do this again? And so what had happened was, I'd gone to the Premier and said, look, thank you for your support all the time I was here. I find this very rewarding. However, I haven't seen my kids in 4 years. My marriage is broken up. I have to get back to my life. I can't keep doing this. And he said, well, no one else could win South Delta for us except you.
But it was a hard riding.
I know that. And they did polls. Ron Toigo did polls. He was a friend of mine. And he said, you could win South Delta. And I thought, so we got out there. And I couldn't believe the animosity. The typical response was, we like you, but we're not going to vote for the BC Liberals again. And I realized then that what did I get myself into? And so 35,000 votes were cast, and I lost by 23 votes.
That was really the first time that you'd ever had a defeat of any sort. Everybody has them in their careers, but you'd been at the top of this, the top of that.
Yeah.
How did it affect you?
Well, it's a humbling experience to lose, but it is what it is, and I thought, well, I have to get on with my life.
Did you find there was a part of you that really enjoyed the rough and tumble part of politics?
Yes. I enjoyed the media scrums, and I was a worst nightmare for the poor young woman who was she tried to push me through the scrums, and one day she said, "The attorney has another meeting." I said, "No, I don't." so I answered all of the questions, and I quite enjoyed the to and fro with the media because I knew that they didn't know as much as I did. So I was never afraid of the media. In fact, I answered all their questions, so it was fine. And to this day, it's held me in good stead for doing that, to be candid with them. And, as you know, the Public Affairs Bureau, whatever they're called now, always wanted you to put, for want of a better, spin on things. And I thought, if we messed up, then we should admit it.
One of the very important things you did, and I know it was close to your heart, were the community courts.
Yes.
Why was that important?
Because I know that the vast majority of people who commit crimes in the street are people who are addicted to drugs, they're mentally ill, they're poor, they come from very vulnerable backgrounds, awfully they're indigenous. And it does no good to keep recycling them through the system. So I went to New York and looked at their community court, and what they did was they started to assess people and how can we help them. So what we did was we put psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors, employment people within the room, and they thought, how can we help these people so they don't become repeat offenders?
So what is going on now then? Because you can't be happy when you look at the downtown east side and hear about all of the repeat violent offenders and stranger attacks. What happened?
Well, I think that we haven't caught up with the issues such as the drug addiction on the streets. I think we're still operating in too many silos. I think that the healthcare system is instrumental in all of this, has to get together with the criminal justice system, has to get together with the police and the prosecutors and with the judges. The judges, by definition, have to be independent. However, having said that, they need to be cognizant of what the public perception is and what the public wants from us.
And fundamentally, it comes down to a question of personal rights.
Right.
And society's rights.
Right, absolutely, yeah. And I think sometimes we err in the side of personal individual rights. Perfect example of that is, should we compel people to seek treatment? Now, our fundamental principle is, well, that should be the decision of the person, but that's not always possible. And I agreed with what the Premier said a while ago. He said, maybe there should be compulsory treatment for the better good, for the public interest. And I think we have to do that. So, yeah.
You know policing really well. You've done several reports over many, many years. When you look at your recommendations over that time and the changes that have or have not happened, where are we at today with policing?
I think we're doing a pretty good job. The people that go into policing now invariably are people with post-secondary education. We have more people policing in Vancouver in the RCMP who have degrees in psychology and sociology. Some even have degrees in law. So we're getting there better, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done. I think the police still needs to have an understanding of how to deal with vulnerable situations. I think that the diffusing the volatile situations by dialogue is something that needs to be done. Women police officers are better at that than men. The first inquiry I did in the 90s, one of the terms of reference is how do we get more women in policing? And there was a resistance on the part of the male officers of getting more women in policing. Like, why? The testosterone ran over. But we find that women are so helpful when it comes to policing. They make good officers because of the different skill sets that they bring. So,
Certainly the forces, generally speaking, look different.
first inquiry I did in the 90s, and that was a focus. And so many senior police managers, all white men, came to me and said, listen, we don't need to get into political correctness and sacrifice quality. So wait a minute. What makes you think that the visible minorities and the women are less qualified? And how is that political correctness? And how do we sacrifice quality in that? So those are things that we worked on, and now you're finding more and more women in policing, in high positions in policing, and that's good.
So over these years, and really is centering around the law in your various careers, what were your major frustrations?
The frustrations is not getting everything done in a hurry.
Well, you and I have known each other for a long time, and people know your public life because it's always on the front page.
Yeah.
I don't think they know much about your private life. For instance, I bet they don't know that you're a history buff.
I am, yeah.
Talk to me about it.
I majored in history at university, but I know more about the 1930s and the rise of Nazism. I know more about the Vietnam War. I read everything on the Vietnam War and World War II, and I just love history and our own history in Canada, which is really neglected. And I've always been passionate about history.
Did you take your love of history and interest in, the academic world into your role as chancellor?
I quite enjoyed it, actually, although I had no power, as you know, being the chancellor. I was ahead of the university, so they told me, but all I did was sign degrees and preside over ceremonial positions. Yeah.
Shake hands.
Yeah, shake hands. I'm in more photographs with people, but sometimes I think it makes a difference. I was on Air Canada recently, and the flight attendant hands me this note. And she said, there's a woman in the back of the plane who told me to give this note to you. The note said, you and I have a picture taken. You don't know who I am, but I'll never forget what you said to me on grad day. You were so thoughtful and caring. So there are little things like that actually mean, I guess, something to some people. And I'm sure you found that to be rewarding when I was a chancellor. And so I guess at the end of the day, good things happen to you over all the challenges and the difficulties that we face in the lives that you and I have had. So, yeah.
And you made a difference.
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for all your contributions, Wally.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Wally Oppal, a BC legend.